Hi everyone, DE. In the antinatalism debate, I've noticed that most of the debate actually hinges around just one generation. It just hinges around how procreation may impact on the child or children that a particular moral agent has. So it's like when we're discussing antinatalism, we're talking about the ethical ramifications of bringing children into the world in a way that can be symbolized by this microscope, which I think incidentally is a little bit misleading, because when one examines something through a microscope, they do it in a conscientious, systematic and thorough manner, but I don't think most people think about how their child might pan out in a kind of systematic, conscientious, thorough manner. But I still think this is a good analogy for how people regard the way they should consider the ethical ramifications of procreation, because it's very narrow, it's not expansive. You know, they're just looking in time frames of a few decades or a century ahead. You know, they're not expanding the possibilities that may occur in the future. And I'm more of a deeper thinker than that, so I prefer to use telescope. And if you use a telescope, if you use this as an analogy when you're thinking and talking about procreation, you can see further, you can anticipate further. You're not just stuck at the start of the 21st century. You're thinking in time frames exceeding the life expectancy of anyone who's living here at the moment. You know, you're talking about hundreds of years, thousands of years. So yeah, I prefer to use this as an analogy for the way that I think about procreation and the ramifications and implications of having a child now in the present, when the effect of that could potentially echo into the future. You know, and let's have a look at a family tree I've got here. This is a diagram of a family tree. Okay, now human beings are capable of counterfactual thought. So let's imagine I get in my little time machine and I meet up with Philip the First of Castile, okay, who lived in the 15th century. Okay, now let's imagine that I persuaded him not to have a child with his wife. Okay, so he didn't have a child, so I'm not going to kill him, because that would be an imposition. I'm just going to persuade him not to have any children. Okay, so he doesn't have any children, so consequently Maximus the First, the Holy Roman Emperor, 1459 to 1519 AD, he didn't come into existence. So I'm going to Tipax that out. So that pain and suffering and his death were completely avoided as a result of his moral upstanding. Okay, so if that person didn't come into existence, then his children wouldn't come into existence, so I can Tipex that out. And then if he didn't have any children, then all of these people wouldn't have come into existence, and all the pain and suffering and deaths that these people experience would have been completely avoided, just as a result of one decision on this man's part not to have any children. So I'm not going to Tipex out all these names because I'd run out of Tipex. But I've got a pair of scissors. Right. So let's cut out the paper just after the person who I spoke to decided not to have any children. any children. Look at all this pain, suffering and death that would never have occurred if I could have got into that time machine. All those names. Now fortunately I can't get into a time machine and go back and try to encourage and persuade this person not to have any children. But what I can do is I can use the internet to try to persuade people to think more rationally about procreation, and maybe one person will decide not to have a child as a result of watching my videos, and all this pain and suffering and death will never happen in the future.